This reading is from Whispers from Eternity by Paramhansa Yogananda. This is entitled, I Beheld Thee Hiding Behind the Flowers. I looked at a flower and prayed. Suddenly, O Father, I beheld Thee hiding there. It exuded to me the perfume of Thy presence. I saw the blush of Thy purity coloring its petals. It was the gold of Thy wisdom that shone at its heart. Thine all-embracing, upholding power filled its delicate calyx. The mystery of life and immortality lay in the pollen, lifted by the bee when it tasted Thy sweetness. O teach me Thy wonders of creation, which are hinted at in even the tiniest roadside weed. And this reading is from Rays of the One Light by Swami Kriyananda, based on the teachings of Paramhansa Yogananda. These are parallel commentaries on the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita. This is entitled, In Surrender Lies Victory. I'm going to adjust this a little bit. Okay. This reading is entitled, In Surrender Lies Victory. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramhansa Yogananda. A case might be made for surrender as a path to victory in worldly conflicts. The way of passive resistance, for example, in preference to armed resistance. But our point here concerns a higher kind of surrender. The surrender of our deluded egoic will to the wise and almighty will of God. Human will is, as Paramhansa Yogananda used to say, guided by whims and limited understanding. The divine will is in harmony with every level of reality. Though the divine will sometimes appears to us, at first, to be wrong, it proves always, eventually, to be for our highest good. Human will is inconsistent. It leads us one day to success, another to disaster. The divine will, when we surrender to it completely, though it is not always easy to do so, always brings us deep inner peace and joy in the end. Jesus Christ demonstrated this perfect surrender to God's will in the Garden of Gethsemane, the night before he was captured and imprisoned, preparatory to his crucifixion. He went apart from the others to pray, and asked them to pray also, but when he returned to them, he found them asleep. Out of his love for them, he excused them, saying, The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. He then urged them again, saying, Watch and pray. Their weakness in those circumstances was particularly sad, and the disciples themselves must have regretted it bitterly later on. We all know the symptoms of human weakness, though we may excuse them in ourselves, saying, Well, after all, I'm only human. But what are the signs of true strength? We find in all cases that these are the fruit of a life wholly surrendered to God. The Bhagavad Gita lists these signs in the 13th chapter. Humbleness, truthfulness, and harmlessness. Patience and honor, reverence for the wise, purity, constancy, control of self, contempt for sense delights, self-sacrifice, perception of the certainty of ill in birth, old age, and frail mortality, disease, the ego's suffering and sin, detachment, lightly holding thoughts of home, children, and wife, those ties which bind most men, an ever tranquil heart, heedless of good or adverse fortune, with the will upraised to worship me alone, unceasingly, loving deep solitude and shunning noise of foolish crowds, calm focus on the self, perceived within and in infinity. These qualities reveal true wisdom, Prince. All that is otherwise is ignorance. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om. This topic, in surrender lies victory, is one that is not necessarily easy to really understand, at least for some people. Certainly I was among them. Not that I fully understand it now, but I didn't understand it at all in the beginning. In surrender lies victory. I mean, of course I can understand it abstractly, that we need to surrender to God's will, that His will is the only power in the universe, and that it is always in harmony with every level of reality, as Swamiji wrote. And so the more we can just get in line with that divine will, then everything will go according to plan. And yet, it can be a little confusing because many of us, when we come onto the spiritual path, have developed strong willpower, have developed strong egos in the sense of healthy egos, or at least moving in that direction. You have to have a fully healthy ego that's strong in that way. I don't mean strong in terms of prideful and egotistical, but strong in itself, not weak, not always full of self-doubts, fully always, timid for lest anything ever happen to it. We may also have fought to come on to the spiritual path, whether the battle was externally with others trying to dissuade us, or internally just with our own conflicts. Remember, the external conflicts are only symptoms of an internal conflict, even if one from the past, past lives, not one that we currently feel now, but still one that we have to fight through now. For example, suppose we left the path in a past life, which probably all of us have done. Meaning not all of us, I don't mean to make it personal, but everyone, some gathering of people has left the path, the spiritual path, in a past life. So then to come back onto the spiritual path in this life, we may have to fight to do so. We may have to basically overcome the energy of rejection that we had put out before. And you can think of it as God testing our sincerity, if you like, that, we had left, so now when we come back, He says, we'll have to see if you really are serious this time. It can be that, but really it's not, because God loves us so much and is so glad to have us back. There's a beautiful story in the Bible of the prodigal son, the child of a man who rejected everything, and then when he came back very humbly to his father and expected to be cast out, or at least criticized or punished justifiably for his wrong. Instead, he was welcomed with open arms. It's a reading coming up soon, I think, maybe in November. So anyway, I won't say more and save it for then. Even Master, when he left Sri Yukteswar's ashram and went to the Himalayas, he said, Master, I'm going to the Himalayas and to seek God realization. And it says in the autobiography of a yogi, I actually once spoke these ungrateful words to my guru. And he was seized by this impulse to go. And Sri Yukteswar quietly said, many hill men live in the Himalayas and yet possess no realization. And Master said, ignoring Sri Yukteswar's plain hint that he, and not a mountain, was my guru, nevertheless I made preparations to go. And so he went and, had an interesting time of it. And then when he came back, and Sri Yukteswarji welcomed him at the gate. And Master said, "Sir, you must have been, troubled and put out by all the duties that I had left unfinished." Master was basically the manager of the ashram, and he had just basically walked off the job. And Sri Yukteswar said, "There is nothing that I want from you. To be upset with you would imply that I was using you for my own selfish gain. I can't remember the rest, but essentially I'm only interested in your happiness. I'm only here to give to you." And I think Master said something like, rarely does one find such unconditional love in this world. What father or mother would be even frustrated with their child for just abandoning them? And so then he said, Sri Yukteswarji and I looked into each other's eyes where tears were shining. It's really very touching and very beautiful. And so we see in the masters examples of this unconditional love, and that's simply a reflection of God's unconditional love for us. So, if we have to struggle to get back onto the path in this life, there's no need to think of it as, or if we struggle later on in the path with something trying very hard to pull us away, whether in a dramatic way, like a dramatic change in life circumstance that makes it difficult for us to do our sadhana, or in the little tiny struggles every single day. There's a phrase, death by 1,000 cuts, meaning just a little tiny cut into our time, a little tiny distraction. Suddenly, it's time for bed again. Master said, "Don't talk to me about bed. I hate bed." So anyway, quite just sometimes it's just so wonderful to have, always it's wonderful to hear Master because he sometimes just says it straight out. But even Jesus was compassionate to his disciples when they tried, but the flesh was weak. And so Master was always compassionate. If you've heard recordings of his voice, they're very strong. It's very strong, and it was. And some of his talks are very strong, and they were. But some of them are very almost admonishing, urging people almost as if he were dissatisfied with them. And Swamiji said Master was never that way. Even then he wasn't that way. But he said those talks are actually anomalous. They're unusual. He said, and all the time I was with him, the only time I ever heard him talk like that, I'm paraphrasing, he didn't say these exact words, but I'm imagining the only time he heard Master talk like that was on the day that talk was recorded. He said he was always patient, always encouraging to the disciples who were working and struggling with temptation, with delusion, with all the different things. He was and Swamiji himself did say very frequently, we want to find ways to encourage people. We don't want to find ways to discourage people. Sometimes he would speak very strongly because he saw that that's what might motivate this disciple to wake up. Both Master and Swamiji would talk this way, But it was never out of impatience, frustration, rejection of the person, ever. And so God doesn't think that way. And so if anybody thinks that way about us, it's us. If somebody else thinks that way about us, who cares? It's only the truth that matters. As Master said, praise cannot make me better, nor blame make me less. I am what I am before my conscience and God. It's really that simple. What you know, if you've been sincere. That's why if somebody praises you for something that you didn't actually do well or do with a pure motive, even if they're grateful, you feel a little guilty. We feel that because our conscience smites us and says, well, they may think you're, all wonderful, but you know the truth. So similarly, if somebody says you're horrible, terrible, ridiculous, well, at the very least we can say, well, I still exist. Somehow I got voted onto this earth by God and I'm still here, so I'd say I have just about as equal right to the air and sunshine as anyone else. I'm no better than anyone else, nor am I any worse. We're all children. That's the big joke of it. Sometimes, as Master said, you will see a big man walking, and he will say, I am such a big man, not necessarily physically, but, some sort of great accomplishment, or a person so full of pride and whatever. And he said, where does that man go but right into the cold tomb? And it's the great equalizer that we are here just a short time. And to take this dream life too seriously is like taking a dream too seriously, or a movie, or a story, trying to live it out beyond its appropriate importance. What we learn in this life is permanent, or at least is useful. We take that with us. And the opportunities to share with others, to serve, to give, is wonderful. That's one of the fundamental purposes of having a family, is that it takes us out of just being centered in ourselves. Sometimes you see that with people who spend too much time alone. They're too much just self-centered. It's as if they live in a spiritual community of one, and they say, all in favor of growing beards? Say aye. Aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. But there's only one eye. And so this happens in many contexts, not even just the spiritual. And so it's very good, and it's natural when we're with other people. They challenge our blind spots, things we didn't even realize. I know when I came onto the path, and I would happily talk to people and talk and talk and talk, that I started to notice that the smile on the face was fading and the eyes were drooping, and I was wondering what the problem is. Would you like a coffee while you're listening? It's just not that fun to be barraged by a wall of sound, which is not how I hope you're not feeling right now, but in any case, you can always click on something else, I suppose. But I wasn't fully aware that, gosh, as much as I appreciated it when someone listened to what I wanted to share or wanted to say or felt like expressing, that they might appreciate it too if I were to listen and to receive and to appreciate what they were expressing. It's partly can be sort of superficially classed in terms of personalities. There's extroverts and introverts, but more there's sort of an outward going energy or a more of a receptive energy. Everybody has both. But people will usually lean towards one or the other, and it's very good to develop the other, not to necessarily make them equal, because we can't fundamentally change the personality that we have, but we may have unexplored aspects of this personality, even from past lifetimes, because you can say, even if I'm an extrovert in this life, I was an introvert in the last life, and I can fake it. I can remember. I can draw upon that strength. If I'm a woman in this life, I might have been a man in the past life. Just about anything in this world, if you find it difficult to relate to, just imagine that you had done that in a past life, and perhaps done it well even. And so what's the big deal? What makes it so difficult now, or what makes us so averse to it now? Just try to access that sort of memory, even if we can't do so literally, just by putting our mind there. And it is a truth, because there are many lives we have lived. That even putting the mind there, if it's not literally to a past life, it could just be to that stream of consciousness and human nature that is responsible for artistic expression, for example, or technical skill, and just sort of tuning into that wavelength. This is one way we can do it. Whatever we can do to make it feel closer. Excuse me. Like when Swamiji was studying for a Greek exam in college, the language of Greek, and it was the night before the exam, and he told himself, when he found it so hard to assimilate, he said suddenly, "You're a Greek," to himself. And instantly, as a Greek, he convinced his mind that he was Greek. And then he read this, and his mind fell in line with the rhythms of the Greek language. He said, maybe I tuned in to the Greek consciousness in the world. I don't know, but he suddenly was able to absorb it easily. It was his own language after all. And in fact, he passed the exam the next day. Only 2 people passed that exam. He was one of them out of that whole class. And this was especially remarkable since he hadn't really been going to class much at all the entire semester. He was fed up with college at that point, and it just wasn't giving him what he was looking for. So, we may find that we have to fight to come back onto the spiritual path. We may have to fight to stay on the spiritual path. We may have developed great strength in the world, professional success, or worked really hard, or just been given a wonderful family. A friend was just writing this yesterday, that I had a wonderful parents and a good spouse, and still I felt something was missing. And so even as we accomplish our initial desires in life, we do find, the devotee does find, that still it's not enough. All these things have not satisfied a hunger in me, no matter how hard I try. There's an emptiness in me, some sense of being incomplete. And I tried to fill it with possessions, I tried to fill it with friends, I tried to fill it with family, I tried to fill it with professional success, and none of those things are somehow filling it or fulfilling it. And so, coming to the spiritual path with this strength, then we talk of surrender. And you see, so many qualities in life have a higher octave and a lower octave. It basically comes down to the gunas, the sattva guna, raja guna, and tamo guna. The spiritual quality, sattva guna, the activating or sort of energetic or restless quality of raja guna, and then the tamasic, the sort of inert, still, unmoving, and not in a good way, guna. It reminds me, it was in our school at Ananda Village when the children were learning about the gunas because we were studying India. It's not that the children in the school always learn the gunas as part of, sort of in the natural course of the day. The school, I should mention, includes children from Ananda Village, but also many from the surrounding area. And so it's not that it's a sort of religious school or parochial school. And so, not that the gunas are necessarily religious or parochial, the gunas just are. But anyway, to leave that aside. So there was when they were talking about the gunas, there was one student who, she was having actually a bit of a difficult time in her home life. And so she was sort of falling asleep a little bit during the middle of the day because she hadn't been getting a lot of sleep at night. And these were kids in 2nd and 3rd standard, and the teacher described the gunas as the, I don't know exactly how, he might have said sattva guna is the calm guna, and raja guna is the busy guna, and then this tamo guna is the sleepy guna. And when he said that, the children looked at this one girl and started laughing. She was kind of dozing, and she woke up and she said, "Hey, I am not a sleepy tuna." And so anyway, it really was charming. So they were very supportive of her. I don't mean to give the wrong impression. I was a school teacher there during that same time. I was very fond of her. She had a good heart, and she had a lot to deal with, and just at a young age. So that may be our struggle too, that as children we had to fight for whatever reason, or we were born as fighters looking for a fight. So again, with this sense of strength, which is basically Rajasik, the strength we develop in the world to deal with the world in its terms or whatever, involves usually, I want this, I put out energy and I get this. I have willpower, and it is again Rajasik. So when we then talk about surrender, well, what the reading is talking about, surrendering to God, means a surrendering upward. raising our energy, centering our energy, getting a very calm, concentrated focus, and reaching upward to God, saying, "You lead me." This happens naturally, even if you've never heard of surrender, because when we get so centered, we feel such peace and connectedness that we say, "God, this feels so good. I want more of it, so I want more of you." It's natural. Again, it's like eating a tasty sweet. We have it and we say, in ora, or, I want more. And I know in ora means again, but anyway, never mind. Leave me alone. So as we reach for it, because we like it so much, it becomes natural to go with that flow. But that's from a position of even higher energy than Rajasic energy, because it's gone from busy to even more energized and calm, centered, focused, like taking the diffuse rays of the sun with a magnifying glass, focusing them, bringing them together into a little light that can be a beam that can be so focused that it can start a fire. And if you've never done that, I wouldn't recommend starting a lot of fires, but it's quite magical to do that and see, oh my gosh, I aim it at a leaf and the leaf starts to smoke. It really seems like magic. And so sometimes these things are fun for us because they take us out of just our normal conception of how things are. That's what concentrate literally means, to gather, to bring together, in this case, the different diffuse aspects of our diffuse thoughts of our mind, bringing them together into one focus. This is what concentration is. It has great power. And you can feel when concentrated that just thinking something, asking God for help, and it can happen even in that moment or in that day. Master said that prayer is 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times more effective after meditation, after Kriya practice in particular, he said, but I'm sure it extends to meditation generally. So, when we are surrendering upward, that is sattvic. But when we are basically in the Rajasic stage of life, and of course we go in and out of, all these gunas each day, so it isn't as if, I used to be Rajasic, now I'm sattvic. We can say I'm more sattvic. Even sattvic, a sattva guna is still a guna, which means it's still not of the soul and still not of God. So even that we want to transcend, but that's easy to overcome, so don't worry about that one. So from a Rajasic person's point of view, if you say surrender, they don't know anything about this higher surrender. So surrender is only what they know of is somebody sitting still, going with the flow. It seems tamasic. You see? For example, someone sitting very still could be meditating, which would be sattvic, or they could be sleeping, which is tamasic, and a Rajasic person looking at them would guess that they're tamasic because that's the only experience that they have. If you're not moving, you're tamasic. That's all I know about myself. They've never experienced the other. This is one reason why some people who are Rajasic in themselves, I was speaking of ourselves, but even others, if you talk to them about meditation, they say, why would I want to sit still? It's a waste of time. Gazing at my navel. To them it appears, because they assume it's tamasic, as a lower level of energy. And in that, they are correct. It isn't a lower level of energy, but a Rajasic person is right to reject tamasic energy. It's correct to do that because the general flow of growth is from tamoguna to rajoguna to sattvaguna. So we can't even argue that, hey, no, because it's actually good for them. All of us have come from tamasic energy into rajasic energy, going from being low energy into higher energy, and we don't want to go back. And so the thing is that on the spiritual path, we're not going back, we're going forward. But unless you've experienced that or have some kind of sort of prenatal memories, past life memories, then it doesn't seem familiar. So again, don't argue with people, or certainly to see it from their point of view and see how it is not only makes sense according to their perspective, it's actually a truth. To say, no, I don't want to be still. I remember a friend of mine, when I was leaving my professional field, I never actually worked in that field. As soon as I graduated, I ended up joining Ananda. But still, I worked as a student and did research and so on in computer science. And so when I met one of my friends after I joined Ananda, and this was in Silicon Valley in California, and I met him and I was talking about how I'm not interested in all that anymore. And I had said this to a number of friends rather insensitively, because these were friends who were also from my past who were involved in computer science, and I was basically saying, I used to do that and now I reject it. How is somebody supposed to feel? I mean, some of them were quite strong in themselves and said, well, good for you, who cares? I know what I want. But this person took it a little more strongly, and I was glad. I was grateful. He said, well, I do care. I do want to be at the cutting edge of things. I want to be where the action is. I don't want to just be sitting on the sidelines, uninvolved. This is exciting. This is what I've given my energy to. It's fun. And so why would I want to just, step out of the game? And he was the first one who basically rebuked me when I was giving an implicit rebuke. And I was very grateful for that. I was impressed, and I appreciated that I was wrong to say that, and that he was right in being true to how he felt. I have to add the epilogue, which is not at all to say, see, I told you so. But I met him several years later, and he was quite disappointed in life. He had been in the game. He had been in the Rajasik energy. He had had some success, and still it left him feeling flat. He had disappointments in other aspects of his life as well, it maybe not professionally. And so where was that bright-eyed young man full of, ambition and sort of who could conquer the world? I hope those feelings came back. But those outward experiences in themselves, the game, did not satisfy him ultimately. So in that, of course, it wasn't a truth. But that's something we all have to discover for ourselves. Everybody has that right. And there are parts of us still that need to be convinced of this, of myself still. We find ourselves suddenly thinking outwardly, this thing will bring me security. This person is my friend and gives me that sense of connection, and I need them. This other person, brings me joy, and without them I can't feel joy. Any joy you feel with another person is a joy you feel in yourself. Of course, it's wonderful to share joy with another person, but we should think more in terms of what we can give to others than what we are receiving from them, because in fact we're really not receiving anything ultimately. It's our response, it's our reaction to that we're feeling. And so there's other aspects to this, but you can't make a point fully without, then, there's other aspects to it, but to give such a talk is hopeless, so I won't. So, to come back to this point of surrender, with a strong willpower, the thought of surrender is not appealing if we think of it as a surrender downward, and to become passive. And in fact, it shouldn't be appealing, because it isn't right. It isn't good to go to low energy surrender. We want to go to even higher energy surrender. If none of this makes sense, all I would say is just meditate. Even during the rest of this talk, but just meditate, because when you meditate, you feel at times that deep peace, and then you want to go with the flow, and you see how it is a higher energy state. It's much better to learn these things through experience. Swamiji gave us this suggestion then when it comes to surrender. He said, rather than think in terms of surrender, if that doesn't work for you mentally, or if it isn't attractive, if you can't actually sincerely put your heart behind it, Then he said, think in terms of self-offering. And it's such a beautiful expression that with my strength, from whatever strength I've developed, from my perspective, I want to offer myself in service, in love. I want to share my strength with others. I want to, for example, if I have some skill, or I was a school teacher at one point, I was knew something about mathematics, I could add fractions actually, that you share that with others. You help them and transfer that skill or that strength and encourage them so that they develop that strength in themselves. Again, self-offering. And then thinking of God, whatever I have that I want to share that with you, it's yours anyway, but I'm returning it to you. I let us, for example, if you want to accomplish something, say, God, let's you and I do this together. As opposed to, God, you can do it if you feel like it. I'm going to get some tea, just you let me know, or I'll wait to see if you've done it while I'm away. No. Or, God, I can't do it because I'm nothing and you are everything. That can work, but rarely, meaning it's not common for a devotee in the beginning. So in other words, you want to give prayers that you can put your heart behind. I remember a man saying to me not long ago, I believe in surrender and I want to surrender, but I don't know if I want to take discipleship, and why should I listen to some other person? I'm born pure and perfect. I don't have to, be accepted or sort of prove myself and so on. And I didn't have the heart to say. So in terms of surrender, but I appreciated what he was saying because he was saying the truth. He was sincere. In fact, that's what I told him. Listen, you're being sincere. You're acting according to what's in your heart. So we don't want to either put on an air of, it is all Brahma. Because that's what we're supposed to say, or that's how we look to others. And nor do we want to feel that I force myself to surrender even though I don't really believe in it. Meaning we may not know how to surrender to God, and any time we've contemplated surrender in another direction, we have not liked it. But I know I need to surrender. I will surrender to surrender. No, self-offering. What can I give? What can I share? From what I have, I lift it up to give to you. That's actually what surrender is anyway. So it's not, instead of surrender, think of self-offering. They're one in the same. But in any case, as I was saying earlier, the best way to understand this is to experience it, to taste of the peace of meditation, to feel that connection. And even if you don't, you meditate, I don't feel any connection, I feel kind of dull afterwards, still you notice things working well in your life. Sometimes when I've been feeling kind of a little dejected or a little down in the dumps, just kind of, oh well, this didn't work out, or what is it all for? Like the song that we were singing earlier this morning. It's funny how sometimes the world will give me little bits of encouragement, little positive perks. Somebody will write a little nice note, or I'll bump into someone who will say, some nice piece of news, or this is something I noticed throughout my life, even before the spiritual path, that when I was feeling particularly self-doubtful or discouraged, the world would find ways to encourage me. I don't think it was the world. I think it was a certain secret someone, capital S, through these different things. But even early on, I noticed that because I was walking around committed to this cloud that was over my head. And this little ray of light would be coming uninvited, trying to push me, saying, hey, cheer up. And so if I committed to my mood, then the ray of light went away. So I did get my desire to be in a bad mood if I wanted it. But often it was very sweet to get that help in that moment. And that happens to us more and more. It's also partly a matter of perspective, because I remember sharing this observation with a friend of mine in college, that whenever I feel down, the world seems to find a way to try to lift me up. And she said, whenever I feel down, the world finds a way to just kick me harder, push me down even more. And I don't know if it was entirely true, and I can say that I've had times like that too, but partly it's also, do we have a default nature of looking for the positive? I'm not claiming that for myself, but I definitely had these experiences even with Swamiji. When I was feeling somewhat down, suddenly a letter would come from him saying, how are you? Hope I heard some good things about whatever project, and you certainly have no reason to feel down in the dumps or whatever. And it was sort of, is there a camera in here? Like, how did he know? But often I was, it was, again, that was a big shaft of light trying to wake me up again. So meditation helps in all of these things. And so that's really the secret science of truth, is just of understanding truth, realizing truth, is to meditate and perceive that truth directly yourself, the truth of God in your own heart.